Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel. Today, talking about Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. In case you are unaware, maybe you found this video without being a subscriber. For the past 46 weeks, the past 46 Saturdays, I've been doing the Swamp Thing read-along on this channel where I've been going through one issue a week of Alan Moore's legendary Swamp Thing run. It's my favorite comic run of all time, and I wanted to revisit it in a more critical way, really taking the time to sit with each issue, break down the art, break down what works about the stories, and just see, how it holds up under that scrutiny. And it was a really great experiment. In almost a year doing that was, pretty interesting. It was a tough project in some ways, because there were times when I was like, does anybody really care about this as much as I do? Maybe I can miss a weekend, maybe not. But I kept through it. I never missed the weekend. And in the end, I'm really happy with having done this. So I wanted to do like a recap video at the end of it all, talk about my thoughts. And in case you were wondering, am I going to continue that series? Because after Alan Moore's done, Rick Veitch takes over, and I have all of the Rick Veitch issues. And I was toying with the idea of just keeping the thing going, just doing the Rick Veitch ones now. I've decided not to. And the reason I've decided not to is, though there's a couple reasons. The first is I haven't read it yet. I've never read the Rick Veitch ones. I bought them all in anticipation of reading them for the first time after I finished this reread. So this will be my first time reading the Rick Veitch ones, and I don't know if there's as much content there or as much demand. That's another thing, is the demand for the videos that I did was already pretty low. Like it's a pretty niche topic. Early on, I had a lot of eyes on the videos. More than a couple hit over 100 views, which is great for such a niche video, for a channel like mine that's just aping cartoonist kayfabe, and me not being anywhere near as intelligent in terms of breaking down art styles as guys like them. But as the series went on, particularly after American Gothic, the views really started to tank on those. And if I were in this for the views, if I were doing this channel to maximize subscriber count, maximize views, I would have stopped this read along maybe 20 weeks ago. But it wasn't about that. It was about this personal project of mine of continuing, getting to the end. But nevertheless, there is a such thing as ROI, return on investment. And the amount of time I put into making those Swamp Thing videos, well, I was not getting the return on that investment. Other people obviously were less interested than I was. So, gonna end it there. So, with that, overall thoughts. How did I feel about this run now? This is my first time rereading it after like 7 or 8 years. It was one of the first comics I read when I got into comic books, and I loved it then. And do I still love it now? Yes, it is still my favorite comic run of all time. Like this reread, having put a lot more comics under my belt since that first read through, this series has not diminished in quality at all in my head. If anything, it is even better because I understand the comics language a bit more. I understand comics history more, and that's something that I didn't realize for a lot of these issues, for a lot of these storylines mattered, So it's only been enhanced. I think this run of comics is truly special. It gets a lot of credit from a lot of people already for changing monthly comics forever. A lot of people would argue that Alan Moore's Miracle Man was already doing that before. What was it, concurrent or before? I might get my timelines confused on that. I'm sorry. But Swamp Thing, in terms of like the mainstream, using a mainstream character, the way Alan Moore came in and he took a run-of-the-mill monster book and he made it this brooding, intellectual, beautiful, horrifying, romantic work of art is something that profoundly changed comics forever. This is a couple years before he started. A couple years before he did Watchmen. Before 1986, when there was that turning point in comics. Swamp Thing was like the lead up to that. 1986. You've got Watchmen. You've got The Dark Knight Returns. You've got Mouse. I think then. So that's like a turning point. But I don't think you even get there without Swamp Thing as the on ramp. So I think historically, all the credit it gets, it 100% deserves, and also it's still better than most monthly comics today. Like I've mostly gotten rid of like Marvel and DC off my pull list. Actually, completely have. I don't read anything by them anymore. But what I was reading doesn't even come close to the quality of comics that this series has. So it changed it, and then people tried to imitate it, and they were not able to reach it. The fact that it covered multiple genres and it did it well, such as horror, such as sci-fi, such as romance, and it had ups and downs, but it never faltered to the point where it fell apart. And it's a really monumental achievement. It's an incredible. 46 issues. I say for the 45 issues of the main series, 20 through 44, plus an annual. And that's not including the DC Comics Presents issue that Alan Moore did, which really maybe I'll do that as a little bonus episode, doing that issue. Maybe let me know if you want that. When I look back on some favorite issues and arcs from the series, a lot of them are from that early part of the run when it was Bissett and Toddleben. So, for instance, I think, issue 21, The Anatomy Lesson, which is, I think, truly Alan Moore's first issue. He wrote issue 20, but that was aptly titled Loose Ends. That's just him, like, ending what the previous team was working on and being like, all right, let's just wrap this up, get it out of here. Okay, issue 21, this is where I start. This is where this becomes an Alan Moore comic. And The Anatomy Lesson turned Swamp Thing on its head. Like, turned him from like a man who was a monster, trying to get his humanity back, and it's where he realized he was not a man at all. He was this abomination that had a man's memories, but he was himself his own like creature. There was no hope of him ever turning back into a human, and it changed everything. It's one of the it's a horrifying issue. It's a beautifully drawn issue. It's incredible. The Anatomy Lesson is every bit as good as its reputation. Issue 25, The Sleep of Reason, is one that I really found to be special on this reread. It's not one that stood out to me my first time through, but sitting down and analyzing it panel by panel, I think The Sleep of Reason might be one of the best plotted issues that Alan Moore wrote. Because he's very deliberate in like what he wants in each panel, and there is so much in the background of panels that pay off like later, or just if you just keep an eye on them or pay attention to them, they contribute to the story in meaningful ways. Like it is brilliant, and like kudos to Bissett and Toddleben for pulling it off. But the planting of those clues is like perfection. I think it is the perfect blend of storytelling, verbally or textually, and visual storytelling. I think it's the perfect marriage of those two things. Reminds me very much of Watchmen, and what Alan Moore would do with that in a few years. So Sleep of Reason's great. Issue 29, Love and Death, also a fantastic one. That's where Abby finds out that her husband, Matt Cable, has been infected and possessed by her uncle, Anton Arcane. That's an issue that really messed some things up. I believe that was the one that got the Comics Code Authority stamp off of the title, because incest played a part in it, and that also led to the beginning of the end for the Comics Code. So another way that this series affected comics history forever. Rite of Spring, issue 34, also brilliant. That's vegetable sex, the psychedelic issue where they're playing with the page layout. You turn it and you touch on it. What's colors are just this incredible, like phantasmagoric, just weird. Oh my god! Like the amazing that people that they were able to do this with just like pen and ink. You know, like how did they accomplish it? It's so beautiful. How do they visualize it? Stunning, stunning. Issues 35 and 36, the Nuke Face Papers, I think is an excellent story arc. Not subtle in any way, but it's brilliant in its unsubtlety. Like it's just, it's unflinching. Just like this is the impact that we're having. This is what we're doing to the environment. This is how we're messing up the earth. Look at it. Look at it. And I love that. I respect that. Issue 52 is a personal favorite, Natural Consequences. That's Abby is imprisoned in Gotham City, and that's Swamp Thing just flexing his muscles and holding Gotham City hostage by turning it into a new Garden of Eden, just overrunning it with vegetation. Love that issue. Love the lengths that he's willing to go to for his woman. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Swamp Thing and Abby are my favorite romance in any literature ever. It's my favorite romantic relationship. Love them together. And the final issue, 64, Return of the Good Gumbo, I think is a really great way to end it. Alan Moore answers a question that that has to be asked because of Swamp Thing's powers of why he doesn't choose to just end world hunger. And the answer that he gives, I think, is perfect and not debatable. So an excellent way to send off and just like and end his run. There are some issues that also don't work as much for me. And a couple of those. This is probably going to be the most controversial one. Issue 32, Pog. People love Pog. People talk about Pog being a comic that made them cry. And just like changed their like view. Like that's the one that changed their viewpoints on how comics can be done. And I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, I get it, maybe, but it doesn't connect to me. I don't connect to it the way that a lot of people do. Even now, after I'm familiarized a little bit with Walt Kelly's Pogo, and again, like bringing comics history into it, I appreciate it more, but I don't connect to it the way that other people seem to. Maybe in 10 years, I'll feel different. I don't know. But for now, Pog still is just like, that's okay. That's good. Number 38, Still Waters. That might be just the worst issue in the run because it's so forgettable. Like there's nothing about Still Waters that I found to be particularly interesting in this reading. The art was sufficient. The story was like very one note. Like there was nothing to talk about in that issue. I'm struggling to talk about it now. So wasn't a fan of that one. Number 40, The Curse, I think is a good issue. This is the one where the werewolf as a metaphor for menstruation. I think it's a good issue. I think it has trouble sticking the landing. I think the ending is very weak. And that was a sentiment shared by a lot of people in the letters columns in later issues. And issue 59, which wasn't even written by Alan Moore. That's the Stephen Bissett written issue. I thought that one was very weak. I think it was like an impression of Alan Moore's writing, but without being anywhere near as good. So that one didn't really work for me. But I can't, it's not Alan Moore's fault. He didn't write it. In general, I would say, so it becomes a science fiction series at issue 54, and then it stops being sci-fi at issue 62. I would say. So a good 8 issues is that, where it stops being horror, starts being sci-fi. Not my favorite. I prefer the horror, and I remember the first time I read this, all those years ago, I kind of tuned out these issues. Like I read them and I skimmed them because I thought the writing either was overwritten, a little pretentious, and I still kind of feel that way. I do still think that Alan Moore was trying a little bit too hard with the writing there, and he was trying to accomplish something that I think he became too lofty in his goals, and I think it's debatable whether he accomplished it or not. But some of the stories, the sci-fi stories, I think were still really effective. Loving the Alien is one that I appreciated a lot more this time. The story Wavelength, which actually that's a Rick Veitch one, it's not even an Alan Moore one. I liked a lot. Usually bringing the new gods in. But the Adam Strange story was pretty good, and it does create that question that needs to be answered in issue 64. And what else was there? Oh, the Green Lantern issue with the plant people. Good idea, shaky execution. So there's some good stuff in the sci-fi, but I prefer the horror. I much prefer the horror. And I also noticed that the American Gothic storyline, the ending really stood out to me as being a bit disappointing. Because, and I discuss it when I do the actual issue 50, I think it was, where at the end it just kind of, like, it's unclear about what's changed. Like, the crisis ended, why? But because light and dark decided that they can, like, work together or exist together, but that already was, like, that's not a change in the status quo. That is the status quo. At least I thought. So, American Gothic is a fun storyline, but I do think that ending was a bit weak. Yeah. So, gosh, yeah, that's a lot to talk about. It's still, when I think of all of the horror issues, especially the stuff early on, but pre-issue 50, this is an unmatched comic series. It's one that I'm still looking for someone to beat, someone to top. I would say Sandman is close. If we're talking about, like, long comic runs, Sandman and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing are like, that's the only thing I can think that approaches it. But I want you to tell me, you let me know what other series you compare to Swamp Thing in terms of quality, like the greatest comic runs of all time. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four is another one that I think is fantastic, although for very different reasons. And like I said, Sandman is up there. So tell me, what do you think I should check out? Let me know your thoughts about Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, your favorite issues, your least favorite issues, your favorite arcs, all of that. Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. But now it's time to get back to reading.